collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, 3 serious cycling accidents have raised questions about how car drivers treat cyclists on our roads.
As a rule of thumb, they should consider cyclists as fragile as if they're made of glass.
Disabled associations call for better facilities at mainstream schools to enable disabled children to benefit from an inclusive education.
The minister is on the wrong way because he make a clear statement that he put as the next step to the budget of the year 2018 money for the establishment of a new special school for persons with disabilities.
A wide-ranging conference on Cyprus archaeology and heritage is taking place today in Nicosia.
It's quite wide in its remit, but we wanted to show that we're touching on subjects where we can bring in lots of aspects that doesn't just have to be what's dug out of the ground.
And Cypriot race driver Tio Ellinas talks about his early racing days.
My dad was doing go-karting down in Cyprus. He took me when I was 7 years old over there to try go-kart. I really liked it, and then 2 years later I started some racing.
Over the last couple of weeks, 2 tragic accidents have resulted in the death of 2 cyclists in Cyprus. Now, if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we deal quite regularly with road safety issues. But it does seem that one of the problems here is that with an increasing number of cyclists on the roads, there haven't been the campaigns that perhaps there should have been to inform and educate drivers of cars how they should deal with cyclists on the road. There is a tendency, I think, in Cyprus to suggest that cyclists shouldn't really be there in the first place. My next guest won't agree with that at all. He's the chairman of the Cyprus Cycling Federation, Yorgos Apostolou. Yorgos, that is true, isn't it, unfortunately, that people see cyclists, and as a motoring correspondent, I know how much space you're supposed to give them, but very few drivers here actually leave a car's width, which is the norm in Europe. They really get very close indeed, and both of these accidents, as far as I'm aware, were cyclists knocked from their bikes by drivers coming up behind them. What's to be done?
Well, it's true that we had 2 accidents over the last couple of weeks. We also had a third one in between the 2 deaths, which resulted in a very serious injury to the cyclists. It hasn't been widely publicized, but there were actually 3 incidents involving cyclists over the last period of time. It is very much true that drivers of motor cars, lorries or buses in Cyprus are not aware of how to approach or handle or take care of cyclists. One of the reasons is because there is no clear cycling approach in the legislation. There is a bill which has been going back and forth around Parliament for the last 6 years, which we hope now will finally be enacted, which will give some protection to the cyclists. It is merely a tool, and that will then depend on how exactly the police enforce it against cyclists, against drivers of motor cars, or equally against both.
But surely it's simply a matter of maybe a TV campaign showing people the amount of space that they must give cyclists on the road, because we don't have bike lanes for the most part in Cyprus. So you've got to give a decent amount of space, particularly bearing in mind the state of some of our roads, the potholes, the road surface. It's very easy for a cyclist to hit a bump and wobble and actually end up in the path of a car unintentionally if it's driving too close.
That is very much true as well. The lack of campaign on the part of the competent ministries, the police, is very much evident. We have been asking for it. We have been asking to be involved in helping them to create one for some months, or if not years. On our part, we have created cycling safety campaigns. It is our job and our duty to inform cyclists on how to safely ride. Not that they all listen to us, unfortunately. There is that Cypriot Mediterranean mentality which is an impediment to people progressively changing their habits on the bicycle as well. But we do inform and campaign cyclists in relation to cycling safety. What is lacking very much, and it is evident by the 3 very serious incidents that we had these past few weeks, is a campaign which is a continuous effort to inform the drivers what to do when you meet a cyclist, how much space you're supposed to afford them, how you pass them by, and how much patience is needed when a cyclist is next to you on the street. I keep telling them over the radio and on television that as a rule of thumb they should consider cyclists as fragile as if they're made of glass, so as to give them a vivid idea of what it is that they should be practicing, because telling them to live a car's length sometimes just goes over their heads. We have to remember that unfortunately we live on a Mediterranean island which is not progressive in its learning and in changing its habits. So we do our best to communicate to the public on what cycling means, what it actually entails, and how they should approach and protect cyclists themselves.
But the real movement needs to be addressed to the drivers of cars and buses and lorries.
Absolutely.
And can the Federation not do something there, or do you concentrate purely on telling cyclists how to behave?
No, in our campaigns we also have slides and points made for the drivers of motor vehicles, and actually we will in the next few days instigate a campaign of educating officially the Nicosia bus drivers with the involvement of the Nicosia bus company, which is a first. It's a pioneering move. It is not, however, our, strictly speaking, place to go out there and educate the drivers or the people who are applying for licenses to drive. What we are doing is we're approaching the competent authorities, having meetings with them and suggesting this, or sending letters to them suggesting ideas. Both the Ministry of Education, we suggested to have a cycling safety lesson every now and then in primary schools and in secondary schools, and also to have a bikeability exam. They refused to do both, giving us a number of impediments on which they never asked our opinion as experts on whether they can be avoided or changed so that we reach our purpose and goal. That is an example of the bureaucracy and the difficulty in adapting to modern times that the state of this island is faced with. We have asked the police and the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Transport to change the way drivers receive their license to drive, include a cycling safety exam. For example, in Great Britain there is an excellent way to inform lorry drivers and bus drivers on what it feels like when you're on a bike and you have a large vehicle passing next to you, by putting those drivers on bicycles and then having the examiner himself safely, under controlled conditions, drive them by. And then they realize what it feels like to be a cyclist, and then that sticks in their mind and they take care of cyclists when they're on the road.
Okay, well, let's sort of encapsulate what needs to be done, because we really don't want any more deaths, and I hate to add that, of course, summer's coming to an end. Very soon we're going to have the dark nights, and that's when, in particular, we never seem to have got the message across to youngsters here that you don't go out on your bike after dark without lights and without reflective gear on, and yet it happens all the time, and we see accidents on that issue every year. But let's go back to this business of drivers and who you think should be, if you like, getting it out there in the media. Okay, the Ministry of Transport, presumably, the Ministry of Education, to a degree, because most of their people are not drivers yet. But what about the local media and press? They would surely be willing to run free campaigns if it was saving lives. Have you tried that?
Thank you for raising that, because we have been, for the last 2 years, asking from TV stations to give them for free the 3.5-minute cycling safety video that we have created on our small budgets to go out to everyone, and they all are asking for money, which we of course cannot pay on a very small cycling federation's budget. I wish we were in the position like British cycling to have that kind of budget, and we would have done that on our own. But unfortunately, the TV stations, radios, they're not willing to help us with getting that public message out. I think what needs to be done is for government to take over and inform properly, with our assistance as experts on cycling matters, the wider public.
And of course we need to add it probably into the driving test.
Exactly.
It does seem that a lot of work still got to be done to get the message across to drivers that there is a very specific way that you deal with cyclists when you're behind the wheel of a car. Telling us about it in the wake of those 3 serious accidents resulting in 2 deaths and 1 very serious injury was the chairman of the Cyprus Cycling Federation, Yorgos Apostolou.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The Education Ministry is in hot water with the parents of disabled children because they say that there is not enough provision for their children in our schools. We're joined now by the President of the Cyprus Confederation of Organisations of the Disabled, Christakis Nikolaidis. Christakis, what is it that the Confederation and all these organisations would like the Ministry to do?
What we want is a very simple decision of them, a policy decision that the Cyprus government will adopt the inclusive education concept. It means that they will start implementing the inclusion of all children with disabilities at the mainstream schools. This is one of the most difficult things, but the most clear thing in the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Committee of the United Nations has long discussions with Cyprus government and us, the organizations of persons with disabilities belonging to the Pan-Cyprian Alliance for Disabilities. We have at the moment 30 member organizations to this alliance. 6 of them are organizations of parents of children with disabilities. And we have the organizations of parents who adopt this principle of inclusive education. And this is what we are looking for.
Well, the Education Ministry came back, I think, at you and said that they are increasing and have increased the number of chaperones for disabled children. But that's not the only problem, I would imagine.
The minister is on the wrong way, and the ministerial staff, the people supporting the minister. Because after our discussion in the last 2-3 days, he made a clear statement that he put as the next step to the budget of the year 2018 money for the establishment of a new special school for persons with disabilities. You understand?
What you're saying, I think, is that the ministry is taking the road of not inclusion,
yes,
but of separating...
segregation, yes, of segregation. And the United Nations asked Cyprus to make clear statement that they are in favor and they will implement inclusive education in Cyprus. And secondly, that they will, because we are very realistic, we don't believe that within a few days or weeks all children with disabilities will be included in the general schools. So the United Nations asked the government to prepare an action plan with the steps that will be implemented in order to achieve inclusive education.
Now, let me just ask you something practical, because we're talking here about children with many different types of disabilities, yes, I think, and with many different degrees of disability. So, as an organisation that looks after, in a sense, all of these different types, what most of all is missing in the schools? Forget the fact that the ministry wants to separate everybody and put them together in a separate school, but in the mainstream schools, what is the ideal? Because people who are partially sighted have different needs from those who are physically disabled.
the argument of the government, and not only that, of people who blocked any development towards inclusive education, is that we have children with very serious disabilities. But the most important principle for inclusive education is that of reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is not general principle. This is applied to each child individually. It means if it is a blind, we know what are the accommodations he needs. If he's partially sighted, of course he doesn't read Braille. He needs large print, for example. If he's deaf, one of the main things he is waiting for from the government is the sign language. And these are the reasonable accommodation. For example, persons with intellectual disabilities, they need in the school either easy to read text, means they can understand, or the documents of the school and the curricula text should be in, for example, images, in pictures and so on. These adaptations should be made in order to facilitate their participation to the school. One of these reasonable accommodation is also this of the assistant at the school. And this is again not another teacher, but he's there to help them, to support them to participate at the lesson. So they should know the sign language, they should know how to communicate with them if, for example, a child has not speech, he doesn't speak. That is why one of the children we had with us this week at the press conference and so on doesn't go to the school because he doesn't have an appropriate school assistant. And this reasonable accommodation are very useful for each category of the person with disabilities separately.
Can I ask you whether or not it's feasible with children who are minor disabled, they don't have really serious disabilities, whatever type of disability, whether it's feasible for an assistant to be, let's say, with 2 or 3 of them in the same school, dealing with them? Because one of the things I think the Ministry has talked about is the fact that it's very people-intensive and therefore expensive. Now, while obviously we don't want to jeopardise children's education just on the basis of cost, is it feasible to somehow broaden what these assistants can do so that they can help perhaps if there are 3 children in a school at the same time?
It starts most with an example which is more clear than that. I think, and the Organization of the Blind has the opinion that blind children does not need any assistance at the school, because they can go around if they are trained to use their cane, to have a good orientation in the school and so on, and they go with schoolmates and so on, and an assistant would be rather discriminating them and they will be stigmatized because the other children will see that they don't need it really. But
that's a very important point, isn't it? Because
yes.
How far are other school children educated to accept classmates with disabilities? If you have stigmatization, does that not have a psychological impact on the child with the disability who's already got enough problems to deal with?
Yes, that is what you said before. It is not the scope of this measure to separate them in their own inclusive school, because if the assistant is always with them and he's becoming an obstacle for them to communicate with the other children, it is of course blocking the inclusive education. But this assistant will be appointed for children they have the need, and they should have the appropriate training.
Do we have people in Cyprus who have the training to do that very important assistance job properly?
There are a lot of assistants who have academic degrees, and they had during their studies courses for children with disabilities. We have, for example, kindergarten teachers or from the university teachers and so on. But it should be clear to them that they should not, that is another very important point, they should not be involved in the process of the lesson itself, to intervene during the lessons.
They are really there as just facilitators for the child to take part.
This is the teacher assistant is another reasonable accommodation. It's different from assistant. And this is very broad, supportive in the United States. They have a lot of teacher assistant in the classroom. They can help the children to use their computer in the classroom if they need to change their position and so on and listen better, or if they want the translation into Braille at this moment. These teachers are extra trained and they are very, very useful.
So it looks like there's a lot of work ahead then,
yes,
not only for your organisation, but it would seem also for the Ministry of Education, as parents call for more chaperones in schools for disabled children and indeed much better accommodation for them in mainstream schooling. It was Christagis Nikolaidis, the president of the Cyprus Confederation of Organisations of the Disabled, explaining there the issues.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
There's a conference entitled Cyprus, Its Archaeology and Heritage, taking place today at the Leventis Gallery in Nicosia. It's organised by the University of Westminster Cyprus Centre, and from there we're joined by John Charalambous and Alicia Chrysostomou. John, what's coming up at the conference and what's the idea behind it?
The fundamental idea is to show to the Cypriot public aspects of Cypriot archaeology, but not in scientific terms. It's just to make them aware of what we have in Cyprus, what we have especially abroad. That's why you are organizing this conference in collaboration with the British Museum. It's a treasure there, it's a treasure in New York, it's a treasure all over England. We had a gathering about 2 years ago in London, where with the help of my colleague Thomas Kelly from the British Museum, we presented a wealth of information about the antiquities of Cyprus that are around UK and elsewhere. And that stimulated a lot of discussion. What does it archaeology mean to us? What does these artifacts we see everywhere mean to the average Cypriot?
So you're hoping that the general public will go along and find out more. How, Alicia, did you put the programme together? What sort of things have you got coming up?
Well, what we're looking for, we really didn't want to concentrate solely on archaeology. We wanted to look at wider aspects of archaeology and heritage and what it meant certainly to the Cypriots. But what came out of our previous conference in London was looking at how tourists also perhaps looked, or non-Cypriots looked at the archaeology of Cyprus and how it impacted them, how they gained from its culture. So we've divided our conference into 3 sessions. So we're showing the relevance of this archaeology to nowadays. So we're looking in the first session at archaeology itself, and different archaeologists are coming to give some papers and speaking of some of the work, looking at collections. Thomas Kiley's with us from the British Museum to talk about the collection there. And we have certain other archaeologists working in Cyprus. But we also really wanted to look at how it impacts nowadays. So we have another session given over to artistic interpretations. So we're looking at how this archaeology, how this heritage of Cyprus affects or influences or is a muse for artists working in Cyprus today. So we're looking at, there's a poet, we've got visual artists, we've got a number of people coming to talk about that aspect and how also it's brought into the schools. And then on our final session, we're looking at other areas where we have, for instance, perhaps more modern, the cultural heritage that you get from this archaeology. So we're looking at 20th century archaeology, so looking at the railways, industrial archaeology, that it doesn't just have to be archaeology from 2,000 years ago that's relevant. We're looking at colonial architecture. So it's quite wide in its remit, but we wanted to show that we're touching on subjects where we can bring in lots of aspects that doesn't just have to be what's dug out of the ground. And we're following this because all our papers are very short papers to stimulate discussion, and our final session is given over purely for discussion, to talk about the questions that's arisen or the ideas that's arisen during the course of the day.
So you're hoping that the people that come along to the conference are going to get involved,
yes,
and participate, even if they're not perhaps experts in archaeology. They're going to find out how it impacts our life today, basically.
Exactly, yes.
If you'd like to go along and join them, that is at the Constantine Leventis Auditorium at the AG Leventis Gallery in Nicosia. It starts at 10 o'clock this morning and continues through until 4:30 this afternoon. And now for some sport. Sam Lloyd of Lloyd Bell Productions was at Silverstone last weekend for the penultimate race in the 2017 Porsche Carrera Cup Great Britain. Contesting the series is Cypriot Eftichios or Tio Ellinas, and he told Sam how he got into circuit racing.
At the first place, basically, my dad was doing go-karting down in Cyprus. We had only one circuit at the time, and it took me when I was 7 years old over there to try go-kart. I really liked it, and then 2 years later I started some racing down there, and then started winning races. I won like 10 times the Cypriot championship. I mean, from cadets, then junior, then senior category, all sorts of categories. And then when I was 13 years old, I went to Italy and I was participating in some European and World Championships. And from there on, through the good results, I mean, I won the World Championship when I was 13 years old, and then came fourth in the Europeans in Italy. So from there on, I could understand that I can chase something bigger in my career.
And of course, I guess you think about motorsport and you think about the UK and the opportunities. When did you then decide, okay, I've got a bit of a talent for this, I need to make the move and progress into other championships and make the move to the UK?
Yeah, to be honest, it happened really quickly because I was racing go-karting up to 17 years old. Then I went to the National Army, so I went inside the army, and one good friend of mine found me an event called Grand Prix Shootout here in the UK. So I entered that, and there were like 50 competitors, and they were taking the best one, and they were giving him 1 year in Formula Ford and a contract just to start his racing career in Formula cars. So I went to that shootout, I went to the top 10, then from the top 10 I've done the fastest lap time and I won the shootout. I got the contract and I came here in the UK, so it happened really fast for me through that shootout thing. And from there on I started thinking bigger things for my career and stuff.
Well, here we are at the Porsche Carrera Cup, and you think of all the different championships that we do have in the UK. Why this particular one-make motorsport series?
I mean, to be honest, I was up to 2015. I was doing different Formula category series. And I was doing GP3 in 2013. I was leading the championship for up to the last round, and then Daniel Kvyat won it. And then went to World Series, Formula Renault 3.5. I made 2 wins. I came fourth in the championship. So from there on, next year in 2016, I was struggling just to find the funds and find the budget. And I've seen that I've became 25 years old as well, so I changed a little bit my approach towards sports cars because I could see much more potential on finding something in sports cars. So when I made that move, I thought of the UK just for my beginning level of my sports car career. So that's why it was the choice basically to do the UK.
How are you finding this series? It's highly competitive. Are you surprised just the wealth of talent that's involved?
Yeah, I mean, you have like people like Dan Kamish, who's winning it for the past 2 years. So also Charlie Eastwood is pretty impressive as well. He's on his second year. Dan is on his third year now. Dina is on his third year. And for me, being a rookie and being at the same lap times as them, and some sessions to be in front of them and beating them, and being a rookie means I'm in a very good position, I think, at the moment. And I can see that it's highly competitive between those drivers, those 4 or 5 drivers that are constantly on the top 5. And for me, it's a very good benchmark just to see what I can do in sports cars through those guys. I mean, where can I finish between those, because it's my first year. So, yeah, it's highly competitive.
And what does it mean to you to represent Cyprus and obviously be here competing in this UK series?
I always felt in my career, to be honest, that I'm a little bit on the back foot because we had no racing circuits down in Cyprus, only one. So I came over here, I had to learn all the circuits when I was doing Formula Ford, and then when I was doing GP3 I had to learn all the European circuits. So I felt like I was always learning in my career, learning. And for me, if I was from here and I knew the tracks a bit better and I had UK as my home place, it would have been much more better just to be on the pace, I think. But anyway, I've showed that I can be there from what it is. And for myself, I feel like on the UK is sort of my second home, because I was doing Formula Ford UK in 2010, then Formula Renault UK 2011, so sort of like my second home for me, just to do some good results over here.
Cypriot race driver Tio Ellinas talking to Sam Lloyd of Lloyd Bell Productions at Silverstone last weekend. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.